President Donald Trump is coming out very strongly against institutional investors, Blackstone, American Homes for Rent, a couple of the larger ones that are buying single family homes. This is something very interesting that's been going on since the mortgage crisis and the Great Recession from 2008 to 2011, 12. And it's something I have actually some familiarity with personally because I was involved in a group of agents that were approached in 2010 from American Homes for Rent as they were coming into our market here in Boise, Idaho and the Treasure Valley and starting to buy single family homes for their portfolio. This was something pretty unprecedented, but the subprime crisis, and the housing collapse drove prices so low that you could make 20-30% cash on cash returns with the rental values in some of these markets like Boise in 2010, 2011, just buying single family homes and renting them. And so Blackstone and American Homes for Rent and a lot of groups started going around the country and buying them. Nobody really even knows, I don't think, exactly how many of these single family homes that these guys own. Some estimates say Blackstone, for example, owns 250,000 homes across the US. Some say that number is more like 500,000. I guess it's just hard to tell based on the way they kind of package their assets and classify their assets in these different funds that they own. But one way or the other, these institutional investors own a massive amount of single family homes, and that does contribute to constrictions on the supply of housing, which is partially responsible for driving up the price of housing. We have these chronic supply issues in our country, worse in some markets, better in others, but across the country there's a general lack of supply, and there has been since the recovery after the Great Recession and the housing crisis. I am for President Trump's initiative to stop this practice. I don't think institutional investors in these gigantic, multi-billion-dollar funds should be able to come in to across the country and scoop up hundreds or thousands of houses. American Homes for Rent, for example, owns like over 500 houses in southwest Idaho. And as a country, we have these constraints on supply, and it just makes it worse. So I do think, and I do support that initiative to stop these investment groups from scooping up these homes that otherwise could go to first-time home buyers. I'll say that about this issue. Like, most of the time, as an agent selling these properties, when you go in to sell some of these rentals, there's two buyer pools for these properties. There's investors and institutional investors that are going to make them rentals, and there's first-time buyers. And there is just an absolutely unprecedented affordability crisis in this country, specifically for first-time buyers. The median age of a first-time home buyer in this country has gone from 30 years old to 35 years old to now today, it's 40 years old. 40 years old, a lot of people, their kids are moving out of the house by the time they're 40, 45 years old. It's getting to the point, and by the way, this median age of first-time home buyer is projected to continue to get later and later. It's projected to even be as much as 45 to 50 years old in the next 10 years if our country continues on this path of inflation and devaluing the dollar, which drives up the cost of everything, and these chronic supply issues. So I am certainly in favor of the initiative to stop these funds from buying houses, but I do also have to say that this is a complex issue, right? Like, institutional investors like Blackstone buying single family homes is not the only reason we have supply constraints. There are many reasons that we have supply constraints for housing and single family housing. The municipalities across the country have gotten more and more stringent in their requirements for developers to get developments approved, which slows down the process of developing housing. Labor costs for everything have gone up. Inflationary pressures have driven up the cost of materials, of labor, of permits, of engineering fees, of architectural fees. The costs across the board have gone up. Land costs have gone up extraordinarily in this country. And so all these costs are pushing up the price of the end product. Labor shortages is a huge reason. There is a shortage across the country, skilled labor, of blue-collar workers to build these homes. And we see that very much here in Idaho. Labor constraints that slow down the process of building and construction of housing. There's this cultural generation factors that are decreasing supply and increasing costs. Baby boomers as a generation are staying in their homes longer than previous generations have. They're staying in their homes longer than they were anticipated to. And hey, guess what? They're called baby boomers for a reason. It was a massive generation, a massive number of people. Millions and millions of people are staying in their homes longer than ever, which decreases supply. And by the way, that dynamic is happening at the same time that the kind of millennial generation is buying and doing household formation in their late 20s, early 30s, late 30s. They're in a position to buy homes, form a household, and normally the previous generations would have been selling them their homes, but in this dynamic, that's not happening. They're not selling their homes, so these millennials are more dependent on new construction because a lot of the resale stuff is not hitting the market, and then new construction is constrained and confined from labor and cost increases. So it is a complicated issue. There's no doubt about it. I've actually sat down to jot down like all the reasons that are contributing to the constrained supply and the affordability crisis, and I'm up to like 15, and I've definitely rattled off a few of them here, and there's more that contribute to it. So it's a complicated issue. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of energy. Some combination of free market capitalism and also, yeah, some government oversight, I think, and changes to how some of these large institutional funds practice and what they can buy and what they can't. So that's my thought on it. This is something I'm going to talk about a lot more. I'm very passionate about it. I'm very passionate about the American dream. What is the American dream? I mean, obviously I'm biased because I'm in real estate, but I've always felt like the American dream is the ability to buy and own a home. And not only because of the freedom and the lifestyle that comes along with ownership versus renting, but hey, go take a quick look at charts and graphs that show the difference in net worth between owners and renters. I mean, the reality is that most people, they build wealth off their home. Their home is their biggest asset. Their home is something they can borrow against. One of the things that is not often discussed is getting equity out of your home to start a business. What do I mean by that? A lot of small businesses are started with home equity line of credit loans. And you've actually, since interest rates spiked up in 2022, you've seen this crunch in small and medium-sized businesses and them not having access to capital. Why? Because traditionally a lot of them have used their equity in their home as access to capital to start a business or continue to grow their business. So, there's many facets of like the American dream: starting a business, owning a home, vacations, maybe, I don't know, rental property, having a second home at some point. But so much of that is based on the stability and the equity that you build in your primary residence over time. And so as we have seen, I don't think people understand how significant it is when I say that the median age of a first-time home buyer has gone from 30 to 40 years old. You're talking about millions and millions of people, like an entire decade, approaching an entire generation of people like who have to wait a decade to buy a house. And all these benefits that come along with it that I've mentioned are delayed. And many of them are actually now deciding not to buy at all, because by the time they can buy, they're 45 years old. Their kids are already raised in their rental houses or the rental apartment. And why buy at that point? They're satisfied with just renting and missing out on that. So I do very much believe that concept of the American dream as it relates to home ownership is in jeopardy in this country. And we are very close to losing it permanently if something is not done about this affordability crisis in housing. There's many factors that are contributing to it. Institutional investors buying single family homes is one, but there are many, many other factors that contribute to it.